This is Greg Canty here, and welcome to the Win Happy podcast. Stay tuned for interesting chats with interesting people about winning their lives and being happy at the same time. This show has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I chat with Karol, diversity and inclusion expert and the author of A White Guy Confronting Racism. Jared, who's based in San Francisco, had an interesting upbringing which led him on this path. At 14 years of age, he discovered that his father was gay, and over time, confusion and anger, and then understanding, brought him towards a career that confronts difference and encourages inclusion. We chat about his upbringing, the death of his father from AIDS, his work confronting racism, and his favourite jazz artists. Let's hear from Jared. Jared, Karol, a huge welcome to the Win Happy podcast. How are you keeping today?
I'm doing all right. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
It's mid-afternoon here. I think it's a little bit earlier in the day in San Francisco. You're in San Fran, aren't you?
I'm in Oakland, just across the bay. I can see the city across the bay here from me. So it's 7:03 a.m. to be precise.
Is the morning a good time for you?
It's a great time. I have kids. I get up early. I do my meditation. Sometimes I'll read. I'll kind of get my stuff out of the way before the whole family gets up. And then I'm usually done by about your time, 3 or 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
So.
And that's when everyone in the family starts waking up and that precious time is gone, I guess.
Exactly.
And then it's on to the rest of your day.
Exactly.
You're a very interesting man.
Well, thank you.
Because you've written a very interesting book with a very interesting title called A White Guy Confronting Racism. So what I'd like to do during the course of our conversation is for the listener to get a chance to get to know you a little bit. And what brought you to a scenario whereby you were writing a book like that? So I'm going to ask you a question that I ask a lot of my guests. Who the hell are you and where did you come from?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. I love the intro and I love the open-endedness of your question because it gives me the freedom to go wherever the hell wherever I want to go, right? So I like to say, I think this is a good way to enter into this conversation, especially given the topic of the book and what I do, that I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't exist as a person if we lived in an equitable world. And the reason I say that is I was born in 1973. And that was the same year that homosexuality was depathologized. So my father, or the man who would become my father, was a gay man. And he knew he was gay when he was, well, who knows the exact date, but as early as 13 when he tried to commit suicide in 1962. So he's growing up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in the 50s and 60s. And knows he's gay or knows something's up, but doesn't know what it is. You can imagine the time, I'm sure in Ireland as well, right? Not the most homo-friendly environment and era.
Absolutely. For my part, I was born in 1965, so I've 8 years in you. And I'm thinking back to my school years.
Mm-hmm.
In all of my school years, I couldn't tell you, was there one person that was gay?
Yeah.
And of course, they didn't exist, did they? A school full with 600 young boys.
Right.
There wasn't one gay boy in there. And if there was, we would have known about it. Isn't that right?
Yeah. So, exactly. I'm glad you interjected with that perspective because my dad, so he goes to college. He's in the late 60s and he's trying to figure out who he is. And, you ask me, like, who am I? And, why am I here? And he goes down to Cuba. Turns 21 in Cuba, and this was in 1970. Castro, he's helping Castro with the sugar harvest, the leftist agitator from the United States. And he comes back to the States and he meets a young woman who's just graduating high school, a woman who turned out to be my mom. And they, in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, where the University of Illinois is, and they leave and go down to New Mexico and they get married and they go down to New Mexico for my dad to finish college. And then I was born. My dad, the whole time he knew he was gay. or he knew, I don't know if there was language for that for him, but he knew that he wasn't attracted to women, but he
Did
did
your
what he
mom
was.
know that?
It's interesting. I've had lots of different conversations with my mom. It's unclear. It's unclear who knew what and what conversations were had and et cetera. But the bottom line is, he under, just societal pressure, he married a woman and had a kid, me. And a couple of years later, they got divorced because my dad finally kind of had the courage, the conviction, the awareness, say, this isn't me. And so here I am, I'm 2 years old. My mom's 21 with a 2-year-old, no education, with an ex-husband who's gay in 1975 in San Diego where we had settled. And so that beginning, and I'm sure we'll get into it as we talk, but fast forward to, the last 20 years. And that's why I do the work I do.
And before we fast forward.
Yeah, please.
That young life for you, having mom and dad who are divorced, separated, whatever language we had. Actually, in an Irish context, you couldn't get divorced at that time. People just separated. There was no legalities around it. It was all just, and we needed a referendum to bring in divorce, incredibly. So it's not here, well, it's here quite a while now, but it certainly wasn't an option back in that day. Did you see them both?
So I lived with my mom in San Diego. My dad lived in San Diego till I was 5. And so I'd see him pretty regularly. There wasn't like this big, a lot of animosity or anything, acrimony. It was just, hey, I'm gay and like, we're going to do our separate things. So yeah, I saw my dad very regularly until I was 5. And then he moved up to LA because he was getting his master's and he got a job in LA. This was late 70s, 1978. So LA, for those who aren't familiar, San Diego to LA is about a 2-hour drive. So, it wasn't far. So I'd see him probably once a month. I remember vaguely, my mom would drive me up the freeway to LA. My dad never drove. He never got his license. And so I'd go up to LA once a month or so and see my dad for a weekend. And then when I was 11, he moved to San Francisco, which, for the geographically, ignorant, it's about 500 miles. So a little bit further. So then it was like, once a quarter, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, I'd go up to San Francisco and see him. So,
and would it be fair to say, Jared, that San Francisco would have been a relatively gay-friendly place to go to? Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I think LA probably too, at that point. I think, for those who know LGBT history, the mid 70s was when things were starting to happen, and more movements, more kind of empowerment, not necessarily, more legal protections or anything, but just kind of more like, hey, we got to make this happen. And so, yeah, San Francisco for sure, when he moved there, and I guess that would have been 84, which, a lot of good going on, but also a lot of, bad with the AIDS crisis, obviously. But yeah.
From your point of view, I'm guessing you're dealing with 2 different things as a young man. Mum and dad not being together. Now, I'm saying that because I separated from my wife when I was 28 and I had 2 young kids, a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I know the effect that had on them.
Yeah.
So I guess in a way, that's my part A of that question. And the part B then was with your dad being gay, which was another color to all of that. Were you aware of that? Did that make it even more different? And here's a young man grown up trying to figure himself out. So what sort of a washing machine was your head in at that stage?
Yeah, well, interestingly, so it's funny, we look back now, as I think anyone does, especially any writer, speaker, storyteller who's going to share things with other people. The power of hindsight and retrospection is powerful. So like what I know now, obviously I didn't know then, but what I know now is that there were 2 things. One, and this also leads into why I do this work. One is, I was an angry kid. I played sports. I would get, I wouldn't say I get into fights, but I was kind of an aggressive kid playing soccer and stuff like that. I would have outbursts and I think I was 10 or 11 and I kicked a hole in, my bedroom door over something, who knows even what it was. And, things like that. And I think, again, I know now is like, most of my friends had 2 parents and, lived in houses, and I had a single mom and we lived in a small townhouse and couldn't afford the thing, so all those types of things. But as far as and my dad not being around, but I didn't know he was gay until I turned 14. So what I know now, because my mom's told me, is that when they split up, they decided that they would communicate with each other as to when they would tell me. Now, doing this work that I know and having my own kids, you can tell, kids get things, quicker and more easily than adults do. So, but whatever, I get it. It was the times they were worried about how I was going to receive it and when to tell me and all these things. So my dad told me when I was visiting him in San Francisco, just before my 15th birthday, that he was gay.
Did he have a partner before that he hid from you?
He did. I remember when he lived in LA, I went up, he had a roommate,
Yeah.
the ubiquitous roommate, male roommate. And I'm, 8, 9, 10, 11. I didn't think anything. I'm like, okay, yeah, dad has a roommate. And he was cool. He was an artist, this guy named Ricardo. And, I didn't think anything of it. But then when I was 14, he'd moved to San Francisco and I was up there visiting for a weekend and he had a friend, John, who we hung out with I remember we went to the Fillmore, which is a famous concert place in San Francisco. Yeah. And John was a chef. So he made us dinner one night, which, my mom was not a good cook. My dad never cooked. So it was like, oh,
I'm going to their house more often.
So anyway, so then it's the end of the weekend. And as I said earlier, my dad didn't drive. So he had this friend, Tom, this guy he worked with, who would always pick me up and take me to the airport and stuff. So he sets me down at the end of the weekend. He says, Jared, I want to talk to you. And, I'm 14. Right. And I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be one of those mushy, like, I love you and I wish we could see each other more, types of things. And so I'm bracing myself for that. And he says, hey, Jared, I want you to know something. Tom is my friend. Well, yeah, I've known that. He's picked me up in the airport like every weekend I've come up. I could figure that out. He says, and John is my boyfriend. I'm gay. And so that just rocked my world because late 80s, the stigma. I'm 14. As I said, I'm an athlete. So I'm not like the super popular cool kid, but I've got kind of a reputation to uphold. And so I'm not about to have a gay dad. So I'm confused. I'm embarrassed. I'm ashamed. And I don't tell anyone for, about almost 6 years. So all the way through high school, halfway through college, I just keep my secret to myself. And it was easy to do because no one knew my dad. I lived in San Diego and all my world was in San Diego and he was in San Francisco and no one knew him.
In a way, was that one of the reasons why he moved so far away from you?
I don't think so. I think he was very smart and educated. He got his master's, so he had a career. And I think so there's partly career opportunities to move to San Francisco, but also, as we kind of discussed earlier, in the 80s in San Francisco, as you alluded to, was one of the most gay-friendly places you could find. And so I think it was more that. And by the way, he died in 2000. So, that's also part of the story as well, which we can get to. But I mention that now just because, I haven't had any conversations with him, obviously, for 22 years.
What's his name?
Arnold Karol. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Him telling you.
Mm-hmm.
In his head, did he process that as being, I've got permission now to not pretend anymore, and this is my boyfriend, so we can nearly behave more intimately with each other in front of my young son. We don't have to pretend anymore.
Exactly. I think there was that for him, like just the freedom to be himself in front of, his son. And also, and again, I don't criticize this too much because, it was the times and I try and be sympathetic to him and my mom. But I know now, having kids and having been a teacher and taught a social justice curriculum, like kids as early as 9 months, 1, 2, they can understand that different people love people. But I think in the time it was like, oh, he's 14 now, he's ready to know this. Was I think the thinking.
Yeah. And he's been preparing for this. He's been
I'm sure he
waiting for the moment, and he's discussing it with his partner. And I'm sure your mother was in the loop as well, so they had it all teed up.
Well, actually, it's funny you mentioned that because I talked to my mom, I don't know, it's probably 10 years ago now, 15 years ago. And it hasn't been the easiest conversations for my mom and I to have because we're not that close. We get along fine, but we're just not that close. She kind of, she's kind of default conservative. So she's not like a Trumper and a kind of, active, but she just kind of leans, conservative. And so me, I'm like left of Mao, right? Like, social justice and understanding all this stuff. So when we try to talk about these things, it's this awkward dance. But that said, we have found ways to discuss some of these histories with each other. I can't remember the exact context, but she told me that they had agreed that they would discuss when to tell me, but that he never told her that he told me that he was gay. So she said, here, she's like all the way through high school trying to look for clues. Like, does Jared know that? And so, and we never talked about it until, I was an adult with kids and everything. And, then we kind of unpacked it.
So he's decided to tell you, Arnold, your dad, and obviously his partner was part of that whole story.
Mm-hmm.
And with any weekend dad, then you're put in the plane or put in the bus or you're driven back. And now you have to handle this bombshell on your own. Yeah. And of course, your mother has no idea, good, bad, or indifferent. And that was probably unfair on her, because I think it's an important piece of information that she should have been armed with, wouldn't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, one thing I've learned over the years, so we're kind of jumping, I want to jump ahead a little bit just to give a little context of like why I do this work. I do this work. So my dad, and, he was gay, he was HIV positive. He actually died of AIDS in 2000. And that, I was 27. I had enough introduction through him to just what the world really was and what it could be and who I could be in the world. But I hadn't really acted on it. I was still kind of bridging kind of my just, easy San Diego life, surfing, kind of watching sports and kind of doing that thing, to really being like an activist and an advocate and an ally and like evolving my consciousness. So when he died, that's when I moved up to San Francisco and started teaching and really kind of dove into who I am today. But before that, to your point, so when I was doing that, I kind of had in my mind like dad, good, almost like the martyr, dad, gay, died of AIDS, politically woke, mom, conservative, doesn't get it, doesn't care. Right? I kind of had painted this binary, which I know now was totally unfair. And it's never like that. It's always more fluid and kind of, on a continuum. And over the years, my mom and I have had a few conversations and around what it was like to be a 21-year-old divorcee of a gay man, with no education, no real kind of means of, she figured it out. And so I've over the years become more sympathetic to her context, not instead of, but just also. It's like a both and. That's, I think, central to how I go about my work today, just with a lens of compassion and empathy.
Yeah,
for humanity, just for each of us, whatever our context is, right?
I get that, but from 14 on for a while, I'm guessing that lens wasn't all.
No,
it wasn't that color. I'd say it was a color red with a lot of anger, and there were a few more doors kicked along the way, and a few guys on the soccer pitch who got some fairly hard tackles.
Exactly, Roy Keane style.
Exactly. Well, he's from Cork City, where I live.
I know. I figure you'd get that reference.
Well done.
I forget the exact story, but when he
the part two of that story, as in the Cork football, the Liverpool keeper now, the one who scored the winning penalty in the shootout against Chelsea, Caoimhín Kelleher, he's from Cork as well. So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah, but no, you're absolutely right. As I said, my narrative for so long, why I do this work, like, oh, my dad was gay, it changed me. I leaned in to be an ally and learn and grow and get, be better in the world. That's all true. But what I also know now is what you kind of brought up, like, I do this work to heal, to see my own humanity, to connect with myself and others, because it's like these two things of like disconnection from, my dad not being around, him being gay, me not knowing how to talk about it, deal with it, not telling anyone, just in this kind of no man's land, right? Of, emotions and being, kind of grown up poorish with my mom. She struggled to work a couple jobs. And so, all those things around disconnection. And then later in life, when I actually learned my history and learned about historical oppression and the history of the LGBT community and the history of racism and, all these things, it kind of was like both, like, like there's that, like I've been living in this bubble for 27, plus years of, whiteness and straightness. Right. But then also kind of realizing like, yeah, I'm looking to connect with people because I was missing that for so long. And I think both of those kind of worlds or those perspectives, those lenses come together to shape, who I am now and the work I do and, how I wrote this book and et cetera, et cetera.
Were you angry with your dad, were you?
I never was. It's funny you asked that. About 10 years ago, I met two women who also had gay dads. One was a woman I actually worked with, and then another woman I knew from social media. And we actually, for a couple of years, we formed the Gay Dad Project. And their dads still are living. And actually, I'm, not super close, but, connected with both of them. And so the three of us, two women and me, and we started this website and kind of like a support group and community. And we wrote a blog and we were speaking and, it kind of fizzled out. It didn't kind of go anywhere, but I met both their dads. And both of these women, and all their dads were the same age, like within 3 months of each other. I mean, very similar stories, right? Marrying women, having kids, that's what you're supposed to do. And then, hey, I'm gay, and then dealing with that. And both of those women, and I haven't talked to either one for a couple of years, so I don't know what their current status is, but as of 5 years ago, we're still kind of angry at their dads for not telling them, even though they got it, that society and they understood the context, why it happened. And yet they were still angry at their dads for not telling them. It's like, you can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
So I know it's a little different because their dads are still living and they have to still kind of have that relationship. And my dad died in 2000. So it's a different kind of context. But I always found it a little odd that they would still be angry all these years later. But who am I to judge their emotions?
Did your routine with your dad change from that moment in terms of seeing him and everything else?
Yes, I think, so I'm in high school, right? I mean, you talk about the most homophobic age for a boy, like 14, 15, I'm coming into whatever, high school and sports and girls and the whole thing. And so, yeah, when I came up, I was still embarrassed, because as you said earlier, I think part of it was to give himself a little freedom of how to behave. So he didn't have to hide. Now he can be open. And so, they'd hold hands, they might kiss or hug or something. It was kind of weird. I always felt like I was safe, and I put that in air quotes, from scrutiny or bullying, because again, there was never going to be any of my friends seeing this. So I kind of navigated it with that. And then as I got older, into college, then I was more okay with it. I think just with maturity. Now I was still worried because I was a college athlete and I was a partier kind of guy. So there was still that dynamic, but again, it was separate.
So in a funny way, Jared, did his secret become your secret?
Well put, Greg. I think that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
His secret that he unburdened himself from, with me, I kind of took over the mantle, so to speak, of it, right? Until I was 20. And this is where, when I give talks, because I do a lot of speaking and moderating panels and stuff. So when I tell this story, what I'm about to share is where I start the story. I'm 20 years old, so I'm halfway through college, and I'm visiting my best friend, Amy, in Colorado. She went to the University of Colorado. I went to University of California, Santa Barbara. And we're camping one night in the mountains. And I say, hey, Amy, I got to tell you something. She's like, what, dude? You're being weird. And I said, my dad's gay. And so I'm 20. So this is 5.5 years, since he told me, right? And this, to your point, this secret, this burden, I'm like, I got to tell someone. This feels weird, not telling someone. So I tell her, and the 3 words that changed my life. It's on the back of the book. It's part of the kind of the back cover copy. Big fucking deal.
Yeah.
I'm like, really? She's like, oh yeah, and she was just so much more worldly. She's like, my uncle's gay and this and that. I'm like, I don't care. It kind of gave me permission to see things differently. I'm still 20. I'm still kind of immature. I'm still a partier athlete guy. So it's not like immediate overnight. I just kind of became this, activist. But that was the beginning of the awakening for me.
Okay. So it sounds like there's a bit of and I hate using the word, but I'm going to use it anyway. There's a bit of a journey from that moment as a 14-year-old when you hear about your dad and, yeah, okay, I need to process this shit, but I'll keep it a secret. I'm glad he's living there and he can do what he wants over there, but my buddies aren't seeing it. And taking that on and actually being an activist around being different, I guess, because the book obviously isn't about being gay, but in a way it is. It's about being different, isn't it? In some way.
Yeah. So, I mean, so a lot of people ask, like, we're telling the story about my dad and the LGBT and stuff. Wait, didn't you write a book about racism? What's the connection? Right. And so, I mean, if we had, 3 or 4 hours, we could really delve into it. But the basic connection that I realized, starting with that night when Amy said that, and then into my 20s, and then when my dad died when I was 27, and really diving into the work was, as I said earlier, like the missed opportunities to connect with people who I perceive to be different than me. So not only everything we've been talking about with my dad and the secret and this embarrassment and the shame and all these things, right? These secrets that I didn't want to, tell anyone. There was all that, but also I grew up in a very, very homogenous environment. I can't think of one Black person who I was friends with in high school. I can think of a couple in college who I played sports with, but I had no visibility or intimacy or proximity to Blackness really for 25 years of my life. And so through my dad, who was a gay man, he was white, but he was much more evolved and worldly and progressive. And so I'd come up to see him and we'd go, especially when I was, of age, and we'd go out to clubs or concerts or whatever things. And, he had friends of all backgrounds, of all ages, and so I was just getting this introduction to the world that I didn't have as a white kid growing up in a very homogenous San Diego suburb.
And there's color everywhere.
I mean, everything, right? I mean, when you hear people talking about, diversity and equity, it's like, it's not just race. It's how do we, meaning people from the dominant narrative, right? White, cisgender, straight males, right? We get to write the narrative. Like history is written by us. And so how do we understand that and then try to buck that system and try and disrupt that status quo? And that's what my work is about. And you said journey. It is a cliche. It's kind of used a lot, but I use it a lot in the book too. And it is a journey. I mean, there's nowhere else to describe it. And I think why I'm effective doing my work and why I think this book has resonated with so many people is, and this was done intentionally, when I share my journey, they see themselves somewhere along a similar, journey that they're on. Obviously not the same exact situations and people and stuff, but the same kind of evolution of consciousness. And that's what I'm trying to help people understand is, hey, it's okay wherever you're at, as long as you keep moving forward to move beyond these frameworks and belief systems and perspectives that are holding you and all of us back.
And your career path, then, you can see little hints along the way of this maybe creeping in, and then it became your thing. It became your gig. And I had a quick look at your profile on LinkedIn with some of the different roles you had. Some of them were corporate, where you were the flag waver for diversity, equity, and inclusion in Semantic and these big companies. And of course, isn't that all the kind of rage? Isn't that all the thing that these companies will do to be ultra cool and all that kind of stuff? Can you talk me through those roles when it actually became your job? Around some of these things,
Yeah, no, definitely happy to. I would back up a little bit.
Yeah.
When I first moved to San Francisco, when I was in San Diego before my dad died, I was parking cars at a hotel. I was surfing. It was a pretty good life. I lived right on the beach.
Sounds very stressful.
Yeah, very stressful, right? And I don't know if you've ever been a valet parker, or tipped someone who's a valet parker, but it's actually a pretty good job. Like you can make pretty good money. So I was doing fine, but I wasn't really doing anything in the world to make it better. So when my dad died, when I moved up, and I'd kind of grappled with teaching and stuff. I was exploring maybe being a teacher, but I'd done a little substitute teaching, but not a ton. So when I moved up to San Francisco is when I started my teaching career. And I was very intentional that I wanted to teach kids the stuff that I wasn't taught as a kid growing up, or if I was, that I wasn't really paying attention to, right? Around history, around current events and how we interact, kind of the social sciences, right? Political science, history, social studies. So when I started teaching, the first couple of years, I was finding my way, and I was what I describe in the book as a bomb thrower, right? It's like, I was just like, you don't get it. And here's, because it was new to me. Like I was learning, I was reversing everything that I'd been thinking my whole life, a lot of influence from my dad, but other things I was reading and people I was meeting. I was just like, rah, 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 rah. And people were like, whoa, dude. Right?
Calm the fuck down.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, and I look back and it's kind of funny. I remember I discovered Che Guevara, right? And so I remember I was just like fascinated, like that Che Guevara. Like I didn't, realize at the time how kind of ubiquitous he was and is still. And some people love him, other people like he's kind of a cliche, right? But at the time I was just empowered by it. And I remember talking to two of my colleagues, and these were women. I don't know. I mean, I was 30 and they were probably 60. So they knew who Che Guevara was. And I don't know what their opinions of him were, but I remember talking like, do you know who Che Guevara is? Do you know? And they're like, look, kid, so it was like, it's this evolution of consciousness for me, right? So finally, in 2006, I landed a job where the school was a progressive school, and I was not only allowed to, but expected to teach a social justice curriculum. So that's when I really honed my craft, my perspectives, my lenses, professionally, personally, culturally, everything. So I did that for 5 years. And then fast forward to kind of your question. So that background of really understanding the history of oppression, the history of power dynamics, doing so much reading and immersing in communities with Black folks and other people of color, with the LGBT community. And so in the corporate world, it's a different world than being in the classroom. But the same principles that I had learned and honed kind of in my teaching career, I applied in the corporate world. Without, it's different though, because there's a lot more pushback, there's a lot more bureaucracy, there's a lot more gatekeeping, there's a lot of that. So you don't get to make as much progress as quickly as you would like in the corporate world. And that was frustrating. And I always look for the small wins. Who are the people who've been impacted? Who are the people who have been moved? Who are the leaders who, through working with me in whatever context, start to make little changes that then start to impact their spheres of influence, their teams, their executive level counterparts, et cetera. So I just had to learn kind of the rules of corporate and play by them a little bit, or else you don't get anywhere. But also not play by them too much, because then you're just kind of perpetuating the system, which is antithesis to the whole point.
And Jared, in your opinion, was obviously you did that role in different places. Was it a box ticking exercise, or was there a genuine agenda that this is better? It's not for the bottom line, but it's just, it's better.
Gosh, it's a good
better
question.
way to live, a better way to conduct yourselves.
For me, it was the latter.
Yeah.
And for the people who I was working closely with, it was the latter, for the most part, like people who were in positions who I partnered with, who, I reported to, who, whatever it was. Right. But I think your question's the right question. And I think for a lot of folks who are in senior leadership positions, who understand enough that this is something they're supposed to be doing personally and their company is supposed to be doing, organizationally, they understand that enough, but they don't understand, they don't have enough fluency and commitment to really not make it a box ticking exercise. So that's the nature, that's the heart of the work, I would argue, for people like me and other people who, DEI consultants, social justice consultants, is how do we get into these spaces and reach the right people, the decision makers, the people with power and influence, and help them understand, like, this can't be a box ticking exercise, because nothing's going to change if you do that. So it's really about relationships.
And I think in a way, once you step into the workplace, it's all about getting the job done, hitting your targets, hitting our bottom line, et cetera, et cetera. So this nice fluffy stuff about everyone getting together and embracing different folk, you can understand how it might be a nice thing to have on the website and a nice thing in the organization structure to have a specialist like Jared Karol on the books. But when it comes down to the meat and the grind, Yeah, okay, whatever. Let's hit the bottom line and let's not be worried about that fluffy stuff. I'm just throwing that out. I don't think that way. But I just think when that agenda kicks in for real, I can imagine this is just a nice to have, and
Yeah, and that's the challenge. And I'm glad you bring that up. And I know you were just kind of putting your corporate executive voice on, but it's accurate, right? And there are different ways that it manifests, but the vibe you were sharing is true. And that's the challenge. So for people like me who do this work as consultants or in-house or whatever our kind of position is, that's really what we're navigating. Because if I come in and just go, hey, like I'm going to deliver this training in power and privilege and marginalization and racism, it's got to be more than that. Yes, that's important. People need to understand those contexts, but then they also need to understand, all right, well, how do we navigate through these? How do we have conversations? How do we move from awareness to action? And how do we continue to support each other? So it's like, there's more nuance in that. So one thing I just finished up, just a small engagement with a company, they reached out to me and said, we've got this D&I council or committee of like, I think it was about 15 people, and they're all just people in the org. This is like extra for them. This isn't their marketing or engineering or whatever their job is, right? And so what they were saying, the person who reached out to me was, this group, we're having trouble. We're pushing up against a lot of resistance. What do we do? So my job then, I came in and we did a couple different sessions of like, let's unpack the reasons, probably historically has been shown, and I've seen it a lot, why people are resisting. So I gave them some frameworks. For example, people who resist these efforts believe in the myth of meritocracy. They believe that everything's on a level playing field. And if that's the case, then why do we have to, have diverse teams? Why do we have to focus on hiring Black people or hiring women or promoting, blah, blah, blah? If we're on a level playing field, there's no reason to do that. So I kind of helped them break that down, say, this is what we're up against. And then session 2 was like, all right, so knowing that, what do we do about it? How do we have conversations? How do we get to the people that we need to get to, who are holding the power, who are making decisions, who are resisting? So it's more than just like training and presentations, actually getting in and strategizing with how to actually do this on a human level, on a relationship level. And that takes time, that takes commitment, that takes, perseverance, all the things. But if you don't do that level of work, you're going to come in and say, hey, I gave a great presentation, but they're not doing anything with it. How come? Well, it's because they don't give a shit.
Yeah. And once again, putting on that corporate hat, where one of our clients is a fantastic company called Star Circle. Mm-hmm. And their job effectively is to source the talent globally that people are chasing. Big international global talent shortage. And one of their tactics, besides having superb software and all that kind of thing that'll identify people beyond LinkedIn, that's the kind of one of the phrases we use.
Yeah.
But one of the tactics for them is to identify the systematic and even the non-systematic bias that might sit in those companies. Mm-hmm. So there they are chasing talent, and they've got these filters that are blocking talent all over the place. So in a way, cracking the bias that might sit inside in that company when it comes to diversity, that when you can kind of open those blinds, mm-hmm. suddenly you've got a much bigger talent pool. So there's a very, very practical P&L reason for embracing bias, because you have more access to more talented people. Mm-hmm. You've got more color within the organization. It's a more interesting, diverse place in opinions. So the minute you can put a spotlight, and again, with my corporate hat, I'm not here to solve the problems of the world in fusion. I want to have a good business, but I'd like to do good and all that kind of stuff, of course. But in a very, very practical level, when you embrace color, and I'm not talking black versus white, I'm talking all the colors that we all have, all the difference, including age and all of that, mm-hmm. then it becomes a more interesting business, and a business that I think has a lot more potential So as well as being a goody two-shoes, and again, you can kick me for using the bad language in that way. There's a very practical reason for doing all of this, because you can have something that's a lot more effective.
Absolutely. So everything you said, I agree with Greg around, there's so many approaches you can make. Like, is it good? Do we take the moral approach? Do we take the good for business? Do we, and I'm not really here to argue for one or the other. I think, they're different. It's almost always a both and, a yes and. But what I like to get at, and again, this kind of stems from my personal story and my, my evolution, is so when my dad was sick, he had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So he first had a brain tumor, I think in 99. So he was about a year and a half. He kind of, he had been HIV positive for 10, 12 years. I'd like to say, like, he kind of knew the end was coming at some point soon. So that's when he started getting into Buddhism. He started going, into mindfulness stuff, just to kind of cope with, like, dying, basically, right? So I remember I'm 25, 26, and I go up to San Francisco, and there's this little yoga studio in Dubois Triangle, which is kind of right next to the Castro in San Francisco. And I go, and there's this woman, her name's Karen Van Dyne, and she's leading this gay men's meditation circle. So my dad and like 3 other guys, they're there. And then there's me, like the 25-year-old, kid. And I'm sitting, and we're on the circle, and it's this beautiful, expansive, high ceilings, like kind of just really, like you could play, concerts there with no mics and it would just amplify, like that type of place. Anyway, I remember going like this, what is this? Like, this is weird. This is hard. I can't do this. Why am I sitting here, counting my breaths and walking slowly in a circle? But I know now, 23, 4 years later, like that exposure to mindfulness and meditation then is core to my work now. And the reason I bring that up is because, what you're talking about, like these, senior people, we're trying, what angle do we reach them with? The moral angle of the thing. When you come from privilege and you've never had to think about this stuff, and now someone like me or anyone who's kind of agitating is bringing this stuff up, equity feels like oppression. So when you see like white men say like, oh, we're the oppressed, like, no, you're not. Shut the fuck up. You're not oppressed, right? You're just used to it being your own way for millennia. And now there's more momentum and movement towards equity, towards actually leveling the playing fields, towards actually giving people who have been historically marginalized equitable access to opportunities. That feels threatening to you. And so the reaction is to rely on privilege, to rely on seniority, on all the advantages that we have, and say, screw you, or I'm out, or I don't believe you, or I'm ignoring you, or don't tell me what to do, whatever all the different responses are, and continuing on kind of, sweeping it under the rug. And so for me, the reason I brought mindfulness into that story is there are 2 reasons why it works. One, for me and anyone doing this work, it's really easy to get pissed off really quickly when you see people behaving this way. And if we kind of stoop to that level as Obama, like Michelle Obama, right? Like they go low, we go high. How do I maintain my integrity, my equanimity, my conviction in the face of such just dissonance, right? So there's that part. But then also for every person who's like, this is a bunch of bullshit, I don't believe this, don't tell me what to do, what about, all the whataboutism, there's someone who's like, okay, I think I understand. Okay, yeah, I'm willing to go on this journey, right? And how do we work with those people who have more potential, who have more interest, who have more curiosity to understand these dynamics and actually do something about them, as opposed to the person who's like, nah, not for me. And that takes an equanimity that I've learned over the years that stems from practicing mindfulness, from being able to sit with that uncertainty, to be okay with ambiguity, to not get thrown off track when someone dismisses you. So I think that's at the heart of the work, is staying with it. And you have to have strategies to be able to do that.
I want to take one pin out of the grenade and throw it at you. And I think it's of particular relevance to the country you're living in. So you take pretty much all of those issues that you've made a career of and trying to balance out and address and get organizations and leaders to think in a more diverse way. And yet then you've got a political party who decides that this is a pretty good agenda to get our followers really, really pissed off. And any little bit of anger or resistance or anything that they would have had as a tactic, we're going to put petrol on that fire and keep putting petrol on the fire. What the hell has gone on, Jared, in 2022 that this bullshit is still happening and it's such a red hot issue in the United States?
Yeah. But to answer your question, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that with all this in the United States, and I'm sure there are versions of it around the world, right? Anything when we talk about race, oh, that's critical race theory. And that's bad. Making white kids feel bad about being white. We can't do that. Yeah, right.
And I saw that new rule in Florida about talking about sex in school.
I was just going to bring that up. I think it just passed.
Are we back in the dark ages?
Well, that's the thing. And so this is the challenge of doing this work. And Ibram Kendi writes about this, and any historian or anyone who's looked at history with even a little bit of scrutiny can see this. We like to think of whether it's race, whether it's sexual orientation, whatever kind of marginalized group, we like to think of it as this like one-way, kind of slightly ascending, road of progress. And that's just not how it is. Every time there's progress, let's just take racism, right? Every time there's progress for race, Black folks, for other people of color, there's immediate and sustained and aggressive and often violent and murderous backlash, right? Slavery ended. Can't have that, right? So you have the Black codes, you have the KKK forms, right? Everything through history, right? There, at least in the United States and all around the world, right? You have the civil rights movement starting to make progress. Oh, well, we're going to murder Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Robert Kennedy and John F. Kennedy, right? Like you're just going to have backlash. Black Panthers come to power. Oh, we can't have that. We're going to have a super huge crackdown on, Black militancy, right? I mean, even Nixon and people protesting the Vietnam War. Can't have that. We're going to start to talk about like tough on crime, which is really a euphemism for like, don't let the Black people get power, right? You have a Black president. Oh my gosh, like we're post-racial. This is great. We have a Black president. Well, Trump, not just Trump the person, but of course he has a lot of power and influence, but the movement of like, we can't have that. What's going on with our world? Democracy is eroding, right? All these things. So you come up to the current moment and to switch issues to the gay. Oh my gosh, kids, we can't have parents and teachers talking to 6-year-olds and 10-year-olds about homosexuality. We're gonna have the don't say gay rule.
Yeah.
Do you know how harmful that is going to be for kids? Not only who are gay or might be gay, who don't know yet, but to people like me. If I'm a 10-year-old, it's immensely harmful and short-sighted, and I don't even know what else to say about it. It's really hurtful.
Yeah, and the identifying it as a political football and an issue that we can use to get some people on our side and fight our battles around the stuff that's crap. And they go nowhere near the big stuff, which is really, really weird. And Jared, to continue that conversation about the politicization of race, we had the recent nomination of Ketanji Brown Jackson, and a very, very qualified individual. She was nominated onto the Supreme Court in the United States. There were just 3 Republicans that voted for her: Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Mitt Romney. And to make matters worse, when her confirmation was declared, or when there were enough votes, 53 versus 47, led by Mitch O'Connell, they left the room. And this is supposed to be a dignified process, and whoever gets voted in or whatever. I'm just saying that with the backdrop of your work. You can see the size of the mountain if that's what's going on in 2022.
Yeah.
So that brings me to your book. Tell me about your book, White Guy Confronting Racism. Who should read it? Where can they get it? What's the general theme?
Yeah, just one comment on the Ketanji Brown Jackson. I think we know, we in the United States know, and it sounds like outside people are very aware too, that these types of things are always contentious on either side. And I don't know. I mean, I have my suspicions, Greg, but I don't know if those Republicans who left the room, if they're intentionally, they would never say this, but if it's an intentionally a race thing, right? I mean, that's a hard thing to accuse someone of, or for them to, they're not going to own up to that. But it's this lack of awareness that what that looks like for an elected official at the, towards the highest level of government in the country, walking out of a confirmation of the first Black woman to be appointed to the Supreme Court. So again, I don't know if there's the consciousness of like, yeah, that's a big thing, or if it's just going to be passed off as like, well, yeah, we don't agree with her politics, or she's liberal, whatever the talking points, which may or may not be valid. So it's that disconnect, I think, and I think it speaks to this idea that many people, and especially white folks, and not just conservatives, don't think like race and racism are really big things to be talking about. And so because they aren't in their view, then why are we talking about it? And you're actually really pissing me off by talking about it. So it flips. And so I think it's a good segue into the book. My book, A White Guy Confronting Racism, an invitation to reflect and act, and that subtitle is very intentional, right, is mostly speaking to white folks. And I've found that, and I knew this, but I've found just from feedback and conversations that, it applies to anyone. Because what I'm doing is I'm sharing my story, my evolution of consciousness, my awakenings, my increased awareness and fluency around race and racism. Because I too, like most white folks, probably around the world, but especially in the United States, I never had to think about racism growing up. It was just the very high level talking points. Racism is bad. Don't say the N word. Martin Luther King was good, and end of discussion. And so I break it down by sharing stories, sharing perspectives, challenging the dominant white narrative, offering ideas for people to mull over if they want. It's not a how-to book. It's not a corporate, 10 things your company can do to fight racism. It's not one of those. I could say part confessional, part manifesto, right? And so it's written in a way, most of it is these little vignettes. They're all about maybe 250 words, so little, one-page little vignettes of little perspectives. And in between, at the beginning of each chapter, there's a longer kind of narrative piece to frame it. And the feedback and the response has been great so far, from white people who are newish on their journey, who are interested in this work and learning. I like to say it's one tool in many. If people, white or otherwise, are coming to think like it's the answer, like, don't read it. But if you're like, this is one thing in my tool belt as I continue to read and learn and watch and listen, then by all means use it, part of your arsenal to do and be better.
Is there a pattern towards the people who are choosing to buy this book and study this book? Have you noticed something? Where is that curiosity being aroused? Is it people who are in HR departments and companies? Is it average citizens who just want to learn a different perspective, or who are confronting this idea that maybe we all carry a bias, but maybe I'm carrying a bias about people of a different race? Who is picking it up from what you've experienced?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to know exactly, Greg, but I think a lot of folks, whatever their role in companies, in the corporate world, who would probably categorize themselves as change agents in some manifestation of that, who are interested and have a little bit of fluency, or if not a ton of fluency, but are aware enough that these are things that they need to be more aware of. Right? It's this meta conversation. And then bringing in ideas to their company. Hey, I was reading this book, and we need to talk about, I'll just pick something at random, the myth of meritocracy. We talk about it being a meritocracy, but it's not really. And here on, Jared writes this vignette that breaks it down, those types of things. And these are all anecdotal types of things. What I'm starting to do more, and if I was bigger than just a one-man marketing team, I think I would have a far greater reach by now. But I am starting to see some small companies, like, as you said, HR departments, L&D, who are using it kind of as like a book group. And it's a little bit challenging, Greg, because as I said, it's not set up to like turn to page 37 and do these three things. It's creative nonfiction, right? So, but I am starting to use it when I go and talk and read from it, and frame the core themes around social justice, around emotional intelligence, mindfulness, storytelling, as jumping off points into a discussion. So, for example, let's just take one of those, storytelling. It's like, storytelling, what's that have to do with race and racism? Well, everything, right? So we're talking about narratives. What are the dominant narratives that are controlling the narrative, right? And by whom, and whose stories are not being told, and why, and what does that look like, politically, culturally, across communities, inside specific companies and organizations, inside specific teams, right? And so just giving these lenses in which to view this work, I think, is really what I'm trying to do. And people are receiving that well. I think rather than say, like, here's what, microaggressions are, here's what bias is, I'm trying to very intentionally not be pedantic and academic and professorial.
And maybe, and quite helpfully, the title of the book, without going any further, prompts you to have a little thought. And maybe I am a white person and I need to start thinking about this a little bit. So I know it's kind of an anchor or a beachhead for some of your work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I know you do speaking engagements. I know you do coaching, but specifically I want to talk to you about this other thing that you do, which is facilitating what you call white affinity groups.
Mm-hmm.
Who are they and how does that work?
So they're all white folks, and there are a number of different kind of ways they come together. Let's take like kind of community. So I'm often invited to small groups that other people are leading, usually on kind of more broader topics, or bigger topics than just white people confronting racism. But they bring me in and say, hey, we're doing this, whatever, this small cohort of white leaders or white change agents or just white people who are interested in in this work. Can you come in and speak to our group on such and such a date? So I'll kind of come in and do those and help frame or help further the conversation, the dialogue that they've already been having, and bring that lens. So that's one kind of way. I'm also starting to do my own versions of those, right? Where I say, hey, I've got a group that's going to cap at 6 people, and here's what we're doing. Here's here's the format, here's the price, here's what the goals are. So it's kind of, and whoever is, as long as you identify as white, you're welcome. And then in corporations, it's, because you have to be a little bit different with the language in corporate, right? With how you frame things. And so often it'll be, in fact, I just had a call this morning with a potential partnership client. I was talking to her, and she said, well, here's what's going on at this particular site, in our company. It's mostly white folks and mostly white men who are in leadership positions. And they don't believe that privilege is a thing. They don't believe in white privilege. And that's a problem, because people, who aren't white in the group, who are by far the minority, are experiencing discrimination, are experiencing exclusion. And so it's something we need to tackle. And they've had efforts in the past where they come kind of head on. Here's what white privilege is, and here's why it's bad, and here's why you need to change. Well, if I already don't believe that that's a thing, that's not going to work. And so what I was talking to her this morning about, and I got to write up a prospectus to kind of get in the door, is, well, let's come at it from a leadership angle. Let's come at it from a community angle. Let's come at it from the lens of, how can we create this culture at your site where everyone feels like they belong, so that the productivity, the efficiency. You kind of go like the business case route. And so that's like the framing. And then when you get into the sessions, I will bring in these more, and I'm putting air quotes here, kind of contentious topics like privilege, like the myth of meritocracy, like racism, like white supremacy. And then we have those discussions. And I tend to be more of like a space holder instead of a lecturer. I've just found if you give people the opportunity to share their views, even if I know that I'm going to need to challenge those views, it creates a dialogue that is more likely to lead to the outcomes that we want, which is less racism, is more self-awareness. And so coming in and hitting people over the head with it hasn't worked for me. Maybe it works for some people. That I don't think so. So that's another kind of manifestation of it. And then what I really like, though, are the people who are leaning in already, the white folks who are leaning in. I just finished up a group with like in a healthcare system. So like white male leaders really interested and concerned about doing better with health equity, right? And so when you have folks that are leaning in and they're not being kind of told they have to do this, but they want to, and they're just looking for someone to help them and guide them, then that's where the magic is. So then it's like, hey, let me bring my experience and 20 years of doing this work and my lenses to support you in the work that you're already trying to do and help you do it better. So lots of different ways it shows up. It just depends on the need and the pain points and the people who are participating.
Sounds good. And where can people get the book, Jared? Most importantly.
Yeah. No, so thank you, Greg. They can get the book at www.awhiteGuyConfrontingRacism.com is the most direct place. You'll go there, you'll see a little synopsis of the book, some testimonials, and links to all the usuals, Amazons and Barnes and Noble. But also I've linked 3 or 4 Black-owned bookstores in the U.S.
Cool.
Which is really important, for white folks doing this work to be aware of. Hey, I'm a white guy doing this work and I deserve to be here and I'm okay with selling books and earning a living doing this work. And I'm aware that I need to be giving back to the community that I'm supporting. So that's really important. So when you go to the site, if you see one of the Black-owned bookstores and you want to support them, I encourage you to do that.
Perfect. I've got a few last questions for you.
Yeah, please.
What's happiness to you?
Oh gosh, happiness is sitting on my couch listening to old jazz records and reading a good novel.
Give me your jazz favorite. Recommended listening. Go on.
Oh gosh, I'm a guitarist, so I do like kind of the Django Reinhardt and Stefan Grappelli stuff, but I'm also a big fan of of course Coltrane and Davis, but I have been listening to Thelonious Monk a lot lately. I've been listening to Hampton Hawes. My son's a piano player. He's 13, so he's starting to learn some jazz stuff. So we've been listening to stuff.
Pro dad.
Yeah, but also, there's so many. I'm looking at my collection here, trying to think. Lester Young, Coleman Hawkins. I like the tenor sax guys. That Sonny Stitt. Yes, that's my guy.
That's the one.
Yeah, just because. I like the bluesy stuff, the bluesy jazz stuff. So anyway, we could get into that whole discussion.
Yeah, that sounds like another podcast. Well done.
Yeah, exactly.
So happiness is important, and this is an analogy I give everyone. You might love playing football, but without goalposts, it becomes a little bit pointless. What are your goalposts? What are those moments where you go, yes? Yeah,
so great question. I love the analogy. I'm a football player too, soccer here in the United States. So for me, I got my purpose coaching certification about 4 years ago. And I was doing some purpose work for a while. I'm not doing that so much directly anymore, but I still use those tools and lenses for myself. And one thing I learned about myself is that I'm motivated by working with individuals. So some of us are motivated by, changing society. Some of us are motivated by reworking an organization and making it better. And some of us are motivated by, connecting one-on-one with individuals. So that's what I learned about myself and confirmed about myself. So when I think of goalpost, I want to work with as many individuals and or groups of individuals. That's why I like these white affinity groups where there might be 6, 8, 10 people in a group, but I'm connecting with them one-on-one, hearing their stories, sharing mine, challenging them, supporting them so that they can go and improve and change and make better their spheres of influence, whatever that may be, in their job, in their family, in their neighborhood, in their community, in their social circles. So to me, that's if I can give someone the tools, the language, the lenses to go off and can carry on the work, then that's what makes me happy.
Brilliant. I have a whopper of a question.
Okay.
What was your best day?
Ever? Probably January 26, 2009. The day my twins were born.
Hey.
6.5 weeks early. Combined weight of less than 8 pounds. And now they're 13 and doing great.
And one last one, if you permit me.
Please.
If you were chatting to your dad right now, what would you say to him?
Wow. I'd say, I think you'd be proud of me, Dad, for who I've become. And I'd thank him for his persistent influence that for many years felt like I was not getting it, but that I got it in the end.
I think he would be proud of you, Jared. Keep waving that flag and celebrating difference.
Yep.
And embracing it. And yeah, you have a good day, okay?
I will. Thank you, Greg. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
Thank you so much for coming on the Win Happy podcast. Cheers, Jared.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Take it easy.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.